Welcome to the debate. We are diving deep into the operational strategies for contractors and roofers today, continuing our series based on the core financial insights in Latif's content. Specifically, we're looking at Chapter 20, which gets right into maximizing legitimate supplemental labor charges.
And this is a really high stakes discussion. Because the difference between profit and loss often comes down to these very nuanced line items. We're talking about charges that are often misunderstood by pretty much everyone involved, contractors and adjusters alike.
Right. So the central question for us today isn't about, technical ability, but strategic inclusion. Should contractors be routinely including project manager competent person supervision, the line item we call lab super, in every single steep slope roof supplement? And should we be granting this request in clear, non-negotiable regulatory compliance?
Or does routinely putting in a high friction line item like LAB Super R, which, let's be honest, adjusters are trained to deny, just create unnecessary conflict? Does prioritizing efficiency and focusing your resources on undeniable, higher value scope items ultimately give you a better business outcome?
I'm going to argue that accounting for LAB Super R is an absolute necessity. It's a non-negotiable federal compliance requirement that professional contractors, they simply must meet to cover their legitimate project overhead and maximize their ethical profit.
And I'll maintain that efficiency and smooth processing are paramount. While the charge is theoretically defensible, routinely including LAB Super R risks slowing the entire approval process. A smart contractor knows that time wasted fighting for $800 could be spent securing $3,000 elsewhere. It really should be reserved only for truly complex, multi-trade scenarios.
My position is rooted firmly in legal necessity. The cost for the competent person, or lab super, is a project overhead expense, and it is entirely separate from standard installation labor. To operate ethically, we have to include it, and specifically, we look to federal law. OSHA Regulation 1926.502, H. This regulation mandates competent person supervision for steep slope roofing work, so that's a 712 pitch and greater, where fall protection protocols are required.
Okay, I acknowledge the regulation, but let's examine the premise here. The insurance industry's standard claim processing methodology, Xactame, dictates how these costs are viewed, regardless of what OSHA's mandate is.
But that is exactly where the distinction must be enforced. The role of the competent person, whose sole function is safety oversight and site monitoring, is completely separate from the working foreman, who is managing the crew's installation quality and logistics. Standard Xactimate labor rates include what's called JPO, or Job Personnel Overhead. That JPO component is only designed to cover administrative and supervisory costs for the working crew. It does not cover the non-working safety supervisor required by OSHA.
That's a compelling delineation, I'll give you that. But adjusters are not typically trained to honor that distinction automatically. They are trained systemically to deny lab super, because the default assumption is that supervision is already baked into JPO or it's covered by general overhead.
But if we absorb the required safety costs, which Latif estimates are typically $50 to $65 an hour, making it a financially significant item, we are actively subsidizing the insurance carrier for a cost that is legally ours to incur and theirs to pay. We can't let adjuster training dictate federal compliance.
But we can't afford to prioritize a legal technicality over the speed of cash flow. A contractor supplementing efficiently values their time at well over $3,000 per hour. If submitting LAB Super means guaranteeing a week of back-and-forth negotiation, that time could have been spent processing 3 other claims or documenting a high-return item. I advise contractors to focus their resources on things that hit the mark immediately, like securing ice and water shield approval by citing IRC 95.2.7.1, or justifying full decking replacement using the unavailable surface criteria. These items get green-lighted when the documentation is sharp, avoiding the fight altogether.
I just disagree fundamentally with the idea that we should abandon compliance for the sake of convenience. If we are legally required to provide this level of competent person supervision, we must bill for it. Period. We have to cite OSHA 1926.502H in the supplement email, framing the charge as non-negotiable regulatory compliance. If we fail to establish this precedent, we're just normalizing the acceptance of absorbing required project overhead.
That sounds good in theory, but that argument completely ignores the practical reality of how desk adjusters are incentivized to move claims quickly. When a claim comes in with lab super routinely attached, even if it's technically defensible, it raises immediate suspicion within the claims management software. This triggers what we call red flag number 4, the automated marker for suspiciously high quantities or amounts.
Okay, explain the consequence of that flag.
The consequence is friction and delay. Red flag number 4 instantly takes that claim out of the automated fast-track approval process and mandates a manual, in-depth review by a senior adjuster. And this isn't just a review of the LAB super line. It subjects the entire supplement to far higher scrutiny. The goal of supplementing is to make approval the path of least resistance. Fighting for $800 in supervision costs is just not worth the risk of slowing down the entire $20,000 claim because we triggered an unnecessary red flag.
I remain unconvinced that friction is inevitable if the documentation is robust enough. Documentation is the universal solvent for adjuster objections. For Lab Super, the evidence is precise. A simple photo with a pitch gauge proves the 7.5/12 or greater slope, which triggers the OSHA requirement. Then, you submit crew photos showing the competent person on site, separate from the crew, maybe logging safety checks. The roles are distinct and the documentation proves it.
But that documentation takes time, and the results are often highly inefficient. Let's look at the example you mentioned, the $8,200 case study. While the contractor eventually won, the adjuster initially only approved 12 hours out of the total request, at only $55 an hour. That partial approval demonstrates the friction and the cost.
But they won the principle. They established the validity of the charge.
Winning the principle on a single claim is less valuable than sustained, efficient profit across hundreds of claims. Let's quantify the efficiency difference for our listeners. To properly document LAB Super, you need time logs, crew identification, a detailed explanation in the supplement. That might be an extra 30 minutes of supplementing time, followed by hours or days of negotiation to secure maybe $800.
And what is your counterexample for that 30 minutes?
Spend those 30 minutes on something undeniable, like multi-layer tear-off. If a contractor takes one clear photo showing 2 distinct shingle layers visible at the rake edge, they have instant proof. If they cite the calculation, 24 squares multiplied by 2 layers equals 48 squares of tear-off labor, that charge is undeniable and typically valued in the thousands of dollars. The return on investment for that quick photo and calculation is exponentially higher than the drawn-out negotiation for supervision hours.
I appreciate the mathematical efficiency argument, I really do, but focusing purely on immediate ROI misses the bigger picture of scaling a professional organization. My argument is about strategic inclusion to prepare for growth. If we're building a contracting business capable of handling 300+ jobs annually, we need legitimate, auditable line items to cover our mandatory project management costs.
And that is a legitimate project overhead cost, but the question is, when do we enforce it?
If we wait only for the multi-trade scenario to bill for management complexity, we leave money on the table for every standard steep slope job. Billing for Lab Super correctly establishes a core component of job-related overhead that justifies professional pricing and systemic recovery of costs as highlighted back in Chapter 15. We have to track and bill for all legitimate costs or our company valuation is artificially low.
That's a compelling strategic outlook, but it needs to be tempered by risk management. For the average roofing contractor running standard jobs, forcing the issue on Lab Super looks like an easy padding attempt. We risk license revocation or prosecution, as Latif warns in Chapters 21 and 22, if we cross the line into non-compliant supplementing. Legitimacy has to be the primary focus.
But the charge is legitimate if the documentation proves the 2 distinct roles and the OSHA trigger.
But the risk assessment changes depending on the job. If the operation is genuinely complex, say requiring explicit multi-trade coordination, triggering the full O&P approval as we discussed in Chapter 27, then the Lab Super line item acts as powerful supporting evidence. It validates the necessity of the project manager and makes the O&P argument stronger.
So you're suggesting that Lab Super should be strategically bundled with the O&P fight?
Precisely. Use your limited friction allowance on the bigger battle, getting O&P approved on a multi-trade claim, and use the Lab Super documentation to solidify the necessity of that management.
For the majority of simple steep slope replacements, prioritize speed and high-return, low-friction items like multi-layer tear-off or code-required IWS. The efficiency gained by reserving the fight for bigger financial fish far outweighs the short-term goal of winning every single supervision argument.
So we have rigorously established that the role of the competent person, the individual covered by Lab Super, is legally distinct from the working foreman covered by JPO, and that the cost for this safety oversight is mandated by OSHA 1926.502H for steep slope work. The professional contractor must adopt thorough documentation and time logs to secure compensation for this legally required safety oversight, maintaining compliance and recovering all project-related overhead. And the wise, scalable contractor focuses intensely on efficiency and maintaining the path of least resistance during the claims process. They recognize that routinely fighting for LAB super risks, triggering system-wide red flags with desk adjusters, which slows the overall approval timeline. So prioritizing high ROI, low-friction documentation yields a higher overall margin and creates a smoother, more sustainable business workflow.
The core principle Latif outlines, it remains the same. Documentation backed by codes, specifications, or regulations is the only ethical path to maximizing profits. It really is all about proving legitimacy.
And contractors have to apply judgment, weighing that compliance requirement against the practical reality of adjuster workflow for every single line item. That balance between necessary friction and efficient execution, well, that's what defines long-term success.
We hope this discussion has deepened your understanding of the complexities involved in supplemental claims and encouraged you to apply these principles of rigorous documentation and strategic inclusion. Tune in for the next chapter of our series, where we continue to explore the systems and strategies that elevate your contracting business.